Welcome to HR Voices, a podcast for independent HR and people professionals and the businesses they support. HR Voices is brought to you by the expert team at HR Independence Limited. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of HR Voices podcast. I'm your host, Mary Asante, and with me here, I've got a fantastic June Hogan. Hi, June.
Hi, Mary.
Right, so June is an outplacement specialist, and today we'll be talking about outplacement generally, learn more about what it is, when you can use it in your business, and also how best your employees can benefit from outplacement. So welcome, June.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Great. So for the benefit of our listeners, please tell us a bit about yourself.
Wow. Thanks, Mary. So yes, I'm June Hogan and I'm a career coach, and I've been specialising in outplacement support since 2019, and my business is Wildwood Coaching. But before that, I had a 25-year career in HR. So I worked within the automotive industry, and I worked within the logistics and supply chain sector, and I was HR business partner, senior HR manager, managing all things HR generalist in that time. And during that time, I also experienced redundancy twice. First time I'd been in my first job out of university, and within 8 years, and everything was going really well. And then the company went into administration. So I lost my job overnight along with thousands of other people. That was my first experience of redundancy. And then I had a difficult time in my life where I had to navigate finding another role, and I was diagnosed with a life-threatening illness. And so that was 18 months where I was out of work. I did find another role, and I went to be a HR business partner. And I spent 8 years at that company, not sure what it is about 8 years. And then I was made redundant for the second time whilst on maternity leave. So I've experienced redundancy on both sides of the table. And then having spent some time sort of taking some time out, a bit of a career break and living overseas, I then came back to the UK and decided that I would give self-employment a go. And specialising in outplacement support felt like the right thing to do because it brings together my personal and my professional experience of redundancy. And now I get to see the difference that outplacement support makes to people every day. So yeah, that's a quick bit of my background.
Excellent. Thank you for that background, June. And yeah, I think as we talk about outplacement generally, we'll be interested to know how your background and your experience, those two redundancies, has shaped your thinking and your business. So tell us then, what is outplacement?
That's a very good question, because I didn't really know what it was for a long time in my career. I got my level 7 CIPD a gazillion years ago, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't on the syllabus when we were doing it. Some people call it offboarding as well. There's a different phrase as well, but traditionally outplacement support. So it's essentially a group of services that delivered by professionals and specialists that can support people who are navigating redundancy. So there's no legal obligation to provide it. You just have to follow a legally compliant redundancy process, as we know. But it's a service that if anyone has ever experienced redundancy, they'll know just what a life-changing event it is. And it's a service that comes in and essentially supports people. So the typical things that are involved will be practical things like help with CV support. Everyone needs a CV to get out into the workplace, looking at LinkedIn, social media, how to find a job, where to find a job, building a sustainable job search strategy, and importantly as well, helping people to navigate the emotion of redundancy and how that affects people. And that can be through one-to-one or group coaching. And also thinking about those people who may look to retire as a result of redundancy. So that offer is also part of outplacement support, thinking about people who want to work in different ways, or people who might want to set up their own business. So it's about taking that life-changing event and working with the individual in a group or individual basis to help them and support them through those next steps.
Great. Thank you, Jen, for that explanation, and also for taking your time to break down what outplacement entails. I think that's really important for anyone going through redundancy, restructuring, whether as an employer or as an employee, because like you've rightly said, it's a life-changing situation. So it makes people stop and reflect. I think after the initial shock of my job is at risk, to fighting, and from my experience, most employees will try to fight in the nicest possible way, as in identify alternatives to being made redundant. Are there other things they can do within the organization to stop them being made redundant? Or can they go part-time, reduce hours, do anything, something to stop that redundancy process? But invariably, we do get to the point where redundancy is the only option for some people. So knowing that, okay, I am going to lose my job and this is going to affect my livelihood, potentially my mortgage, food on the table, and everything else, because there are some people who may be the main breadwinners or the only breadwinners in their families, and losing that income source is a huge deal to them. So having some sort of outplacement support, I would think, will make the whole experience a lot easier and a bit more softer, and at least knowing that they've got that support along the way to help them transition.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I often see, and we work with people at all different levels, from people in entry-level roles up to the C-suite. And some people have been in roles for, or some people have only ever had one job. So they have literally been there since they were 18. And that's really common. And so there's so much fear around, as you just described, I'm losing my job, income, support for my family, my identity. There's all lots of other stuff that maybe we'll talk about that's at risk as well. But then there's that, well, where do I start? Well, literally, some people, and they just don't know where to start. And so they feel lost and overwhelmed. And all of a sudden, all those feelings can snowball. And that's really real and really tangible for people, because it's just that point at which they just don't know what to do or where to turn. And when we work with them, we're not here to rescue people, because I believe everyone has what they need. I believe they are resourceful and complete, and it's our job to just support them through it. But when they come to us, there's almost that relief of, somebody here can help guide me. Somebody here can help to support me. I'm not alone. And that's one of the things that I always say to people is, I say, we're here to support you. And we have an introductory call, and I say at the end, and I say, just so you're not alone, you can message me, ring me, whatever you need for the period of time that we're working together. And that makes a huge difference to people.
I bet it does. So for anyone listening, at what point would they consider an outplacement service? Is it when they first start to think about potential redundancies, or is it when they've gone through the process of actually being able to identify the actual roles at risk, and hence narrowing the pool to the people who may potentially be made redundant at the end of that process? At what point would they engage an outplacement service?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And ideally, what I would recommend is, in those initial planning discussions, before anything's announced, when you're having those discussions with the leadership team, you want to get it on the table. You want to have it included as part of the budget, and you want to get people on board and get the buy-in. And so that can be deciding on a short list of providers, deciding on how you want to provide the support. If you've got enough budget for individual, just as you say there, maybe you've got 30 people at risk, but actually it might only be that you might be able to find alternatives, and maybe 10 people might be going in, all that kind of thing. So I would say get it budgeted up front and get the buy-in up front. There are situations, and I've worked with hundreds of, over 100 businesses, where it will come up as part of collective consultation. So maybe they didn't think about it as part of the planning. In collective consultation, quite rightly, it comes up as a challenge, and then they might look to offer it then. Or if you're just doing a small group, sometimes it can come up in one-to-ones. People say, well, are you offering outplacement support, and who might you have? But I would plan it up front. And then in terms of when to deploy it, if you like, so you don't want to waste your money. You don't want to offer group sessions, for example, to 50 people if you're actually only going to be making sort of 30 roles redundant, as it were. So I would choose that time in the process. People need to know up front that you're offering it and it's going to be available. I think that's really important. But choosing the right time to put the support in place. And certainly for individual support, then what I would recommend, and I send out just some information that people can use in consultation meetings. So when you're in those individual consultation meetings, in the event your role's going to be made redundant, this support will be available to you. And then they've got the information. And as the consultation meetings progress, if redundancy is confirmed, at least they've got it there. And at that point, they can get in touch.
I think you've made a really good point there, June, around the fact that telling people is an option, because it's not a service that you would want to impose on people. It's a service that you are giving to people as an option, as part of the package of support that is there if they would like to tap into it. And you may encourage them by giving them the information, by telling them of when it might be taking place, etc., for them to consider, not necessarily you will go to this workshop or you will do this, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I'm talking to organisations in those planning stages, what I'll say is that in my experience, not everybody will want it because maybe they had a job lined up. Maybe they've got really scarce skills and they can literally walk into a job tomorrow and they don't need the support. Some people just won't want to engage in it. Some people might be thinking, well, I just want to part ways with the company, want nothing else to do with them. You just don't know what people might be thinking. So if you've got 10 people at risk, then I probably budget on 50 to 70% take up, because you're unlikely to get everybody who needs it, or feels that they want to engage with that kind of support. So that's useful in the budgeting process. And certainly what I always say to people is we only want to work with people that want to work with us. So yeah, it's available to people, but it's certainly not compulsory. Yeah, I don't want anyone being dragged along to a workshop.
Absolutely. I think that's really important. And let's say you've got the buy-in, you've got the sign-off, and the outplacement support is going ahead. What might it actually look like to someone who's never experienced or outplacement support before?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, Mary. And so when we work with organisations, we'll get an understanding of the dynamics of the people at risk and the sort of the people that we're going to be talking to, either on a group or individual basis. So if it was group workshops, for example, they can be in person, they can be online. The ones that we run online, we run them as shorter 1 hour to 90-minute workshops, because no one wants to sit in front of a screen for all day. And I don't want to talk all day either. So, and those workshops will be interactive, but in a way that people feel comfortable, because we know not everyone's comfortable in this kind of setting, and we know it's a sensitive time. So you can expect that the sessions will be led by somebody like myself or like my colleagues, and they'll be focusing on things like navigating change, looking at the emotion of change, helping people understand that actually it's not just you that feels like this. This is normal, the change curve, all that kind of stuff, and getting people to maybe move to a place of kind of acceptance around what they're going through. That's tricky to do quite quickly, but it is a foundational part of any group workshop. And then moving into the more practical things. So helping people identify their skills and their strengths, and then thinking, well, how can you show that on a CV? What does that look like when you're applying for roles? And then one of the things that we do, as well as looking at job search strategy and kind of redundancy resilience, if you like, because when someone finishes work, there can be that it's very quiet in the house, days are long, and without some kind of structure, it can be difficult to maintain focus. So we do some of that work. And then we do really what people really value, and I think is really important, is a bit of interview practice, interview techniques, and helping people with that. So that's how a sort of a group workshop would typically run. And on a one-to-one basis, there's more of that's done for you. So working with a CV writer who will literally have a one-to-one call and then take away the information and put together a CV in line with best practice. take a look at your LinkedIn profile, come up with recommendations, help you with a job search strategy, work one-to-one on a kind of fortnightly basis, doing research and providing support. And then coaching is really around, where is the individual at? What do they need? Where can we meet them? And I always say to people, it doesn't matter whether you've decided you just want to be another finance manager and that's all you want us to help you with, or whether you're completely overwhelmed and you literally don't know where to turn. We are able to support people wherever they are in that kind of on that change curve. So it's all about, for me, it's all about the individual and understanding who they are and what they need.
Excellent. Great. Thank you, June. And when you're working with people in organizations, you tend to do the group work as well as one-to-one with them on the same project? Or is it some cases might be group work only, and some cases might be a mixture of the two, or purely one-to-one?
Yeah, it can be a mixture. So generally what I would say is that if you have people at different levels in the organisation, putting them all in a group workshop doesn't really work. And it's hard for us as facilitators to address. You've got the finance director sitting next to a warehouse operative. It's just hard. The dynamics don't work. So some organisations, depending on how the size of the restructure and budgets, will offer group workshops and maybe one-to-one for some of the more senior members of the team. But if you're only making a small number of people redundant, or if you've got the budget for one-to-one support, because one-to-one is always going to be more tailored, because instead of talking to 15 people, you're just talking to one, then it can just be purely one-to-one support. And that's where it's important, if you're doing this up front, if you've got ahead of the curve, this is happening, it's part of the budget, it's part of the planning, is to go out and talk to a few providers, get a short list, understand, well, how do they work? What are they about? What are their values? What do they stand for? What support could they deliver? How would they do that? And what kind of budget are you likely to be needing if you want to offer that support?
That's great. And for people listening, and I think budget has come in a few times, and it's good to really address that all important aspect of it, thinking, oh, well, it's all nice for you to talk about placement. I'm making people redundant because I can't afford to employ people. Now you're asking me to go and spend money on a placement service, which is extra money on top of what redundancy costs I may be incurring and stuff like that. How steep should your pocket be for you to even consider an outplacement service?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I would say that if you're looking to do group support, then that will be the most cost-effective way of doing it. So you could probably budget around £300-400 per person, depending on how many people you've got coming to a workshop, if you were going to offer group support. And then individual support, our packages start at £595 plus VAT, for example, and they go all the way up to thousands, as it were, depending on what the individual needs. And so depending on how many people you've got and what you think they might need. So some people might only need quite light touch support. Other people might need more of the one-to-one, and clearly the more time you spend one-to-one, the more expensive it gets. So I would say if you've got between, say, £300 and £500 a person for your group support, and that would be generous, you'd get quite a lot from that. And if you're looking at one-to-one, then I would say anywhere between kind of an average of about, I don't know, my maths is a bit rubbish, but between kind of 500 and 1500, it'll give you something reasonably sensible. And then it's about positioning it as an investment as opposed to a cost. And that can be challenging. As you quite rightly say, Mary, I get it. There were lots of organisations that just can't afford it. And I completely understand that. And there are things that you can do for free as a HR team and offer and do the best you can. But it costs, but presenting it as more of an investment in the business as well as the individuals is it can be tricky, but it's a way to win that leadership team over.
Absolutely. And thank you, June, for being for your transparency around that, because I know costs is something that for most small organizations, especially consultants, is almost like a dark art to talk about. Thank you for your transparency around that. And I also think it's really important to highlight that, because if you are able to budget and it's something you can accommodate for, then really the experience of the people leaving the organization doesn't become one of, well, because I'm leaving, you don't care about me. but actually sends a really good message to your people who might be staying behind, the employees that you are retaining after your redundancy. It gives them a bit of hope that actually, even if people are going to be made redundant, or when they are going to be made redundant, they're still looked after and not just abandoned or neglected, etc. And I think there's also probably a high chance as well that if you're offering outplacement support, litigation and appeals and whatever might be minimized as well, because yes, we've explored all options and know there isn't an alternative role for me here, but actually you are giving me that support that I need to help me move on to my next role.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful on lots of different levels. And I remember in a restructure, it was the last financial crisis, and I had sat next to my colleague for probably 5 years. And we were in a pool and we had to apply for our own jobs again, you know the score. And she was leaving. And I wanted to know that she was going to be okay because we were friends and it was hard to see her go. And so someone who was staying, that was important to me to see that the organisation was treating her fairly, but also that impact on retention and performance, because any restructuring is destabilizing, it's unsettling. And people who might have thought about leaving before, that's often the time when if they see things are not being handled well and people aren't being treated fairly or offered support, then that might be a time when you lose some of your best talent, because they think, well, if that was to happen to me and I was going to be treated like that, well, I don't think so. I don't think I'll hang around. So it helps with survivors. I don't really like that term necessarily, but it helps with the retention on that level. And I love that Maya Angelou quote about people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And I can still remember vividly how I felt in both my redundancies. I can take myself back there within an instant. And that stayed with me, and it will stay with people. And I worked with an organisation last year who had to make redundancies, but they knew that when the change of government came in, they would probably need to start recruiting within kind of 6 months. And that has come to pass. But offering outplacement support was something that they wanted to do anyway, but they knew it would have an impact on if they needed to go back to that talent, or if that talent was to recommend other people to their organisation. So it's an investment that goes far beyond kind of being nice to people. It's way more than that.
Absolutely. Let's touch slightly on your own experience in those two instances and whether you actually got outplacement support or not. And if you did, what difference it made.
Well, I didn't get outplacement support. So the first time the company was going into administration, so there was no money. But what I do remember from that, and that is a really hard way I found out on the news that the company had gone into administration. And I remember ringing my boss at the time. So this was 20 years ago. And I rang him and I said, oh, I see that the company's gone into administration. What do you want me to do? I assumed that HR would have something to do. He said, well, nothing. He said, there's no job. And I just remember thinking, oh, really? I was completely naive as to what that even meant. I had no idea. So he said, you can just come in tomorrow and you can collect your things. And that's it. And yeah, there was no offer of, well, if you want to have a chat or come and find me, we'll grab a coffee. I just felt adrift. And by the way, I'm still friends with that manager now. So it's water under the bridge. But at the time, I felt really alone and literally adrift. And because
I think maybe one of the things that happened there is because you were all losing your jobs, you put it less to the manager's fault, so to speak, than the company's sort of not being able to support you through that process. And that might well be the reason why you stayed in touch and you're still friends.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you're right. There was literally nothing he could do. And I get that. The thing that he could have done was to say, but if you want to talk or you want to help to process it through. And as I say, we're friends now and it's all good. But that was really hard. And the second time I was on maternity leave, and it's really that I've been managing redundancies up until that point, but that really helped me to realize what it feels like to not be in the business when redundancies are being announced. So I'd been out of the business maybe for 4 or 5 months. I forget the timing now, and we were called to a conference call, and I was sitting at home with my son and listened to the conference call and just thought, oh my goodness, that doesn't sound good. But was then just like, oh, what now? And I felt really alone. And I appreciate if you can't make 100 phone calls in a day, but there weren't that many people in my situation. So thinking, again, from my perspective, if I was advising people who are making redundancies around thinking about those people who aren't in the business, just a follow-up call or check an email that says, you're on the call today. Any questions you've got about the news, let me know. And then when I was going in for my meetings, I was going into the Open Plan office, and I remember I had to walk through the Open Plan office. Well, they hadn't seen me in months, and they were like, oh, you're back. I just couldn't wait to get in that office and just have the meeting. And then to come out again and have heard the news, I just wanted to get home. So just thinking about logistics with that kind of thing, maybe a meeting room that's close to the entrance, or if you can do them off site, maybe if they're sensitive. But certainly that point of when I heard those words, your role is at risk of redundancy, I genuinely didn't hear anything else after that. It was just a blur. I just wanted to get out of the room, and I just thought, hold it together, don't cry, just get home. And that was it. So those insights have really stuck with me. And again, I'm left on good terms. It's all fine. I'm friends with the manager who had to go through that because she found it tough as well. But when you've been on both sides, I think it does give you those insights. It doesn't mean to say you can't be empathetic if you haven't. Absolutely not.
That really raises sort of an important point, a point where as HR professionals, we get asked all the time, which is, how can you deliver this news and not seem affected by it? It's as if you don't care because you're just delivering the news, or you are in the room supporting the manager to deliver the news, etc. But really, the human aspect of it really hits home. I'm yet to come across one HR person, and they may be out there, I might not know, who is supporting a redundancy process who is unaffected by it, because the intricacies of it fix into, when you're thinking about the legal aspects, the legal timelines, etc., handling these conversations sensitively so that people are not, and more often than not, people go into the state of shock when the first news of your job or your role is at risk hit them. They're mostly in shock. And 80–90% of people, you may not get any reaction out of them because they're in shock. And it's a lot of the time after they've had time, some days afterwards, to process it, for it to sink in, etc. That's when whatever starts to come in. So it's something to be very mindful of when you are going through this process, that the impact on the employees, and sometimes, or more often than not, the impact on the team support that process as well. I know managers hate it. Yeah. Absolutely hate having to, look at their teams, look at who should be made redundant, who shouldn't, etc. Working through the score matrix, everything, making sure that it's fairly done, taking into account backgrounds and all those sort of things. It's a really, really challenging time for everyone involved.
Yeah, absolutely, Mary. And when I was on the other side, I can still remember the managers were always delivering the news. It was always their message. They had to take accountability for it, and they would find it incredibly hard. And then when the emotion kicked in, that was when often I would step in and try and help to navigate that with them, whether, as you say, that was shock, or whether it's anger or sadness, but just being able to notice that. And it is a process that weighs heavy on you, because when you see somebody break down in front of you because they are the main breadwinner, because they literally don't know how they're going to find another job, they've been there all their life, all these other things, you can't help but feel connected to that. And you should feel connected to that, because as you said before, if you're just distanced from it and it's just a process and you're just reading a script, then I would question, not why you're in HR necessarily, that's a bit extreme, but I would question that ability to really identify with someone else's emotion and have that empathetic approach. And yeah, you're right, line managers do find it really tough because they're having to lose good people in most situations. People haven't done anything wrong. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing bad about them, because if there was, they'd been in a disciplinary process. So this is just people who have turned up for work, done a good job, and we just can't keep as many of you, or we've lost a contract, or whatever the situation might be.
Yeah, companies going through some sort of economic hardship,
Yeah.
or there's like you said, loss of a huge project that they were anticipating to come in, sometimes funding or all sorts of things, or turning the market can impact on companies' ability or businesses' ability to sustain their workforce.
Yeah.
And that is what generally drives a lot of these. And you've talked about sometimes people also mourn leaving their colleagues and their friends behind. And yes, you can stay in touch with people and stuff like that, but might not be the same because they may have gone into a routine, especially workplaces that offer gym membership and stuff like that. They may get into routines of going to the gym together with their colleagues. They may get into routines of going for lunch together and occasional outings and stuff like that. And they really get to know each other well outside the workplace as well. So it's a change from that angle as well, isn't it, sometimes for people when it comes to leaving the workplace. So providing the outplacement support, almost certainly, I think whenever you can, sounds like a no-brainer, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's just that support to help people with their thoughts and with their challenges. And we get to see a slice of life as well. So in those meetings, as you say, going into those meetings, you can never really know what's going on in people's lives, what else is going on in their lives. And very rarely, in my experience, is redundancy the only thing that they've got to deal with. And so if they are navigating issues with their children, relationship challenges, health issues, caring responsibilities, their own health. We've had people going through IVF, for example, gender reassignment. The list goes on, literally. We've had lots of people in lots of different circumstances, and thinking that they're already dealing with something like that. Why wouldn't you want to help them deal with something which is, as we said before, it's not their fault. They haven't done anything wrong. And the organization is just having to let good people go. So I see the difference that it makes, and we get the feedback on the difference that it makes. And people would often just say, it was great to know that I wasn't alone. The support's made a big difference. I wouldn't have known where to start without you, all that kind of thing. And that really warms my heart, because that's what people need, in those situations.
Excellent. Thank you very much, June, and a very fascinating topic that we can probably spend a lot more time talking about. But thank you for sharing your experience, and would love leaving our listeners with 3 top tips that they can ponder over in relation to the topic. So in this case, outplacement.
3 top tips, right. Well, the first thing I would suggest is to have those discussions early on when you're looking to, is being contemplated, or if maybe you're doing a kind of review of benefits policy, whatever it might be, looking at it then and getting something in place for if you might need it in the future. So doing the planning early, seeing it as an investment, not as a cost, and the benefits that it can bring, and really thinking about the individual at the heart of the process. And that's something that I think is incredibly important, because if the process becomes more important than the individual, that's when the balance is tipped. So if you focus on the individual when you're planning redundancies and thinking about the people behind the roles and people behind the numbers, and that quote that we mentioned about people always remember how you made them feel, then outplacement is just one piece of that jigsaw when you're looking to plan redundancies.
Excellent. Thank you very much, June. And it's important as HR consultants, HR independents, and people professionals to always remember that it's important to put people at the center of everything that we do, as difficult as sometimes those things may seem or may be. It's very important. So thank you for that reminder, June. It's important to always keep people at the center of everything you do. And thank you for tuning in today and for listening to us. And if you have any topics that you'd like us to talk about, please get in touch with us, and we'd love to hear from you, or leave us a lovely review. Take care and see you soon. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of HR Voices. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover or would like to be a guest, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us on social media or email us at hrvoices@hrindependence.co.uk. Tune in next time.